Welcome to today's Daily Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to be your guide as we take today's news and transform it directly into a syllabus blueprint. Look, if you're gearing up for the Civil Services examination, you already know that just reading the news, well, it's simply not enough. You've got to connect the dots back to the static syllabus to really maximize your retention. And that is exactly what we're going to tackle today. So let's jump right in.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're organizing everything strictly by general studies papers. We'll kick things off with GS2, move right into the tech and economy focus of GS3, and then we'll wrap up with a high-energy rapid revision and some actual mains practice questions.
All right, starting with Section 1, GS2 Polity, Governance, and International Relations. So, let's look at how a messy daily headline translates into a core constitutional concept. You've probably seen the news that the West Bengal CID searched the residence of the former chief minister regarding alleged forged signatures. But here's the thing for your exam preparation. The everyday political noise, it really doesn't matter. What you need to focus on is the progression from this specific event to the static constitutional themes. We're talking about state police powers, the rule of law, and federal accountability. You really must be able to step back and critically examine the legal framework governing how state police investigate political leaders. It's all about balancing state autonomy with institutional accountability. Now moving from law enforcement over to human capital. Take a look at this number, 51.5%. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the current faculty vacancy rate at IIT Kharagpur. Literally 824 out of 1,600 sanctioned posts are just sitting empty right now. It's actually the highest vacancy rate among all the IITs. And honestly, this isn't just a minor administrative hiccup at one campus. It highlights a massive systemic crisis. The mandated faculty-to-student ratio for IITs is supposed to be 1 to 10, but that norm is fundamentally failing across the board. Think about it. With 80 students fiercely competing for every single IIT seat, these kinds of supply-side failures directly threaten our entire elite higher education ecosystem. And it goes deeper than just HR. This directly undermines the National Education Policy 2020 target of hitting a 50% gross enrollment ratio by 2035. So when you're writing about this, make sure you point to the root causes, like the pay gap with the private sector, heavy administrative burdens, and of course, the ongoing brain drain.
Okay, let's shift gears to international relations. We've got a pretty unprecedented parliamentary statement coming from Nepal's Prime Minister, Balen Shah. He actually admitted that the border dispute isn't entirely one-sided, which kind of suggests India might also occupy land claimed by Nepal. This fresh outreach by Nepal's new Gen Z-led RSP government is a big deal. It signals a potential reset over the Kalapani, Lipulekh, and Limpiodura areas. But, as an astute observer, you always have to keep the China factor in the back of your mind, especially with the Nepal foreign minister's impending visit to Beijing. That is definitely a strategic watch point.
So what does this all mean for your higher-level essay writing? Well, this evolving diplomatic situation is a textbook case study for the concept of cartographic nationalism. Think back to Nepal printing disputed territories on its currency notes in 2020, or China's continuous release of standard maps. Printing disputed territories on a map is this modern tool of statecraft that, honestly, usually deepens conflict rather than resolving it. It's like drawing lines in the sand. Keep this whole theme of the cartography of conflict in your back pocket. It's going to be absolute gold for your philosophical essays.
All right, moving right along to Section 2, GS3, Tech, Economy, and Disasters.
We have to start this section with a really somber reality check on urban governance. The horrific Flourish Day bed and breakfast fire in Malviya Nagar, Delhi, which tragically claimed 22 lives, exposes a fatal, glaring gap in our disaster management. See, the Ministry of Home Affairs mandates a 5-minute response time for fire services, but the Delhi Fire Services chief came out and openly stated that this is, quote, highly unrealistic given our modern urban sprawl and terrible traffic. And compounding that logistical nightmare is something called the flashover point. This is the terrifying reality where modern building materials can heat up and ignite simultaneously in under a minute. This massive gap between paper regulations and the grim ground reality is exactly what you need to critique when answering governance questions.
Now, over on the economic front, you absolutely must understand this structural shift happening in rural employment guarantees. We are transitioning away from the legacy MGNRGS program, the one defined by its 100 days of work per household, its demand-driven nature, and its status as a legal entitlement. And we're moving towards its successor, the new VB-Graham-G scheme. This new architecture is fundamentally different. It relies on a formula-based allocation with a very strict 60-40 center-state funding split. For GS3, being able to clearly compare and contrast these two different architectures is going to be crucial.
Highlighting another massive economic shift, we have this number, 11%. Electric vehicle sales in India have surged 45% year-on-year, officially crossing an 11% penetration rate in total vehicle retail for the very first time. No way around it, this is a massive milestone for India's sustainable transition. It perfectly blends a huge economic opportunity with a whole host of new policy challenges for us to navigate. Okay, let's look at the cutting edge of cybersecurity and national security, because this next story is wild. The Anthropic AI model, Claude Mythos, recently discovered 23,019 vulnerabilities in global digital infrastructure. Over 6,000 of those were labeled critical. And the truly terrifying part, only about 1% of them are patched. What would take human experts literally decades to miss, an AI found in a matter of seconds. It's a real game changer. It proves that as frontier AI capability just explodes, creating this highly asymmetric threat landscape, human institutional wisdom and democratic accountability have to become our final critical line of defense. Let's reset our attention now for Section 3, our rapid-fire revision summary.
Time to lock these facts in for prelims. First up, the Zojila Tunnel, 13.14 kilometers long, costing 6,800 crore rupees, making it the world's longest single-tube bidirectional high-altitude tunnel. Next, the Kaladan project connecting India and Myanmar. Remember that the 109-kilometer Palatwa to Zoranpui road segment is still incomplete, pushing the target date all the way to 2027. Moving to geography, note the massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake in the southern Philippines that generated 1.4-meter waves. Over in global health, a severe cholera outbreak in Nigeria's Borno state has tragically claimed 74 lives. And finally, in economics, HDFC Bank just raised its one-year marginal cost of funds-based lending rate to 8.40%.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 4, Exam Application and Conclusion. So, drawing on that tragic Malviya Nagar fire we discussed earlier, how would you actually structure a forward-looking, solution-oriented framework in an exam? Remember, you can't just list the problems and complain. You have to actively address the outdated National Building Code norms, those unrealistic 5-minute MHA response targets, and the very real danger of modern flashover points. A good answer here must integrate technology, realistic resource allocation, and incredibly strict enforcement mechanisms.
And reflecting on the Prime Minister Balin Shah development, think about formulating a genuine diplomatic roadmap. Your answer needs to delicately balance the historical cartography, the messy legacy of colonial boundary lines, with India's current strategic imperatives. And you absolutely must keep the China factor in mind here. How does India project both restraint and regional leadership while still firmly safeguarding its borders? It's a tough tightrope to walk.
To wrap things up today, I want to leave you with this powerful philosophical thought for your essays. It perfectly captures our whole discussion on border disputes. Nations are narratives, as the scholar Homi Bhabha wrote. The literal lines we draw on maps define the very narratives that we fight over. So as future administrators, as future policymakers, how will you shape the narrative of tomorrow? Will your maps be instruments of cooperation or just more confrontation? Keep that question in your mind as you study today. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and stay focused.